Yeah.
1 second, please. Just 1 second.
Okay. Good to go? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On this Sunday afternoon, it's the last session. Maybe you could project even the first slide there. So I will start with a short story. So my name is Ruhiza Jean Boroto, and I come from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I consider myself very lucky because I really grew up in the midst of many cultures. For example, my first day of school was on a makeshift desk, not even a desk, but actually a log. The roof was banana trees. And my grandmother used to roast eggs for me in hot ashes. She used also, when she goes to the field, to get crickets for me, and then she will also roast them for me. And I will sleep with her at night, and she had a special grass that has a strong smell to chase away red ants, because they used to attack us at night. All that is traditional knowledge. But I think the most important story that I want to tell, when I was a child, I had a problem in my eye. So a small stain was developing. And if unattended to, actually, it grows so big that it blocks the view. You become blind on that side of your eye. And I can remember that I was submitted to several treatments. Early in the morning, I had to go to the lady in the village who was the holder of some wisdom. And there was a plant that used to crawl, and it came with a small blue flower. And the lady would tell me that when the sun is rising, I had to pick up that flower and put it between the sun and my eye. So look through the sun, through that flower. That was one treatment. The other treatment, which I believe was efficient because, as you can see, my eyes are clean and good, there was another plant. So this plant was found in the mountains, and you had to pick it up and pound it. It has a very strong smell. Very strong and nice smell. So you pound it, and then you take the drops in the eye. I believe that is the plant that made the magic. Because in our beliefs, in many beliefs, there are things that don't seem to make sense, and other things do make sense. So I have been looking for this plant for many, many years, and until last year, in February 2023, I went in my village, and I am a water engineer, so I always believe that my legacy is also to make sure that, though I don't live in my village, but at least to make sure that my village has got water. So we went up in the mountains and to find some sources, and so that we can bring water by gravity. And to my great surprise, I found that plant in the mountains. So I know where it is. I took some samples, and I get them to be grown. And I hope that in the near future, we can examine and study that plant to characterize its properties that have been beneficial to me. So I put that introduction because then in the area of food security, we are faced with many challenges to feed the people. The world population is growing. There are crops that receive all the attention. I'll just name one. For example, maize. You don't need publicity to know that maize is a very popular crop. I mean, you can say also wheat or rice. But next to these crops, there are other crops that have got value. And they are called forgotten crops. They are called also indigenous crops. But I think forgotten crops, when we were discussing with my colleague, Nakita there, who will speak from the youth perspective later on, and she was challenging me. Why are they indigenous? Why is it that quinoa is indigenous to Latin America, and now it's adopted all over the world? It is still indigenous. So, and then I was explaining to her the problem is that many of these crops have potential, but they are not valorized. They are not promoted as much as these crops, such as quinoa. I think quinoa is out of that league now because it's worldwide known. But there are many others that we can discuss today. So in the outline of this session, we have my colleague Rosaida Dolce, who will make a presentation on the work that we've been doing. So yes, part of me is from the village, as I mentioned to you, but I'm here on behalf of the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, where I lead a program called the Global Framework on Water Scarcity in Agriculture, WASAG, which is a partnership, and I can see some of our partners are working in the room. Welcome. So, and this is a partnership that goes into all directions of addressing water scarcity. Then within FAO, with our strategic framework, we felt it was important to look at these indigenous crops as part of one specific initiative that supports our strategic framework. And it speaks about the betters, four betters: better nutrition, better environment, better life, and better production. And I will allow my colleague, Rosaida Dolce, to make this presentation on addressing water scarcity for agriculture and environment through these indigenous crops. And I think I'm very happy that we are as many as we are in this room on a Sunday afternoon. Many of our speakers dropped. Our speaker from Malawi dropped. Our speaker from Cabo Verde just dropped. We're still waiting for our speaker from Icarda. So it will be our show here, maximum 90 minutes. Yeah, with that, I invite Rosaida to take the floor.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you all for joining it today, as you said, on Sunday afternoon, and I'm very pleased to present the keynote presentation of this session that focuses on AWSAME. AWSAME stands, as you can see, for Addressing Water Scarcity for Agriculture and Environment, and this is an initiative under the FAO and the Land and Water Division. And as all of us know, water scarcity is one of the more pressing issues of our time, particularly for agriculture. So AWSAME is not just a response to this crisis, but is a strategic initiative designed to bring together innovation, partners, knowledge sharing, and tackle water scarcity. So today I will take you through the vision, mission, and objective of these initiatives. A bit of background. So FAO strategic frameworks has 4 betters that we call better environment, better life, better production, and better nutrition. And this initiative is under the better environment. And it was designed with a comprehensive approach, acknowledging that addressing water scarcity cannot happen in isolation. So we must consider agricultural productivity, environmental sustainability, and livelihood of communities that depends, of course, on water for their survival. So our goal is to build a resilient in agricultural system, enhance water efficiency, and foster good practices to ensure sustainable growth in water-scarce regions. So to achieve this scope, AWSAME seeks synergies with initiatives such as OCOP, VACS, and the RAF compendium on indigenous crops. And as you can see, these initiatives it's a bit different from WASAG, as Jean mentioned it before. WASAG is a partnership, while AWSAME is an initiative that focuses on sustainability, with the 3 entry points: drought resilient, to address water scarcity; nutrition, indigenous and forgotten and orphan crops; biodiversity, fauna and flora, including soil fertility. And over the last year, we have developed, as you can see on the right side, a compendium on drought resilient and nutrition crops with a potential for biodiversity. I will tell you more about it later. And now we are in the implementation phase with a pilot phase in 4 countries that has been identified, and are Cabo Verde, Malawi, Morocco, and South Sudan. The next phase is the expansion. So we will develop 4 global project proposals. We organized a workshop in Malawi early this year in February, in Ben Guerir, in Morocco, and where we have discussed the suggested crops for the 4 countries. These crops come out from the development of the compendium, and then we have examined the status and the opportunities of these neglected and underutilized food and legume species. We have agreed then forward to a strategy to be adopted for a project implementation. Here you can see the suggested crops for the pilot phase. So mainly is millet, bigna, that are cereals and grain legumes, and the different varieties, and in the different countries where they can be adopted and used. The QR code that you see here is the compendium that I mentioned before. Right now it's in an Excel file with all the crops analyzed and all the information that we have found out, but our plan is to publish it in the coming months in a publication. So I invite you all, I see already the phones on, so to screen the QR code and have a look on it. These are just some of the benefits of these forgotten crops opportunities, because they are drought tolerant, salt tolerant, nutrition. They have socio-economic benefits, they are resilient, and much more. So these are only a few that we should take into account why we should focus on forgotten and indigenous crops. Through the workshop that we have done in Morocco, we had the opportunity to discuss the importance and the relevance of this initiative, but also to focus and translate what we have discussed in a project idea and proposal, focusing on enhancing resilience to droughts, improving food security, nutrition, and biodiversity, land restoration, and developing value chains for income generations. So after this workshop, we have been in contact with these different countries that we mentioned before to identify and prioritize the crops adapted to the local condition of the countries, especially in countries with a very dry season. And some suggestions that came out from the participants were to agree on variety of seeds for selected crops groups to ensure global agrobiodiversity, and in parallel work also on policies and strategies to develop these crops in countries, to consider both positive and negative aspects of these crops, such as marketability, consult countries to develop receipts and varieties of national food consumption to increase market demand for these selected crops, and in the end, to include managing risk in agronomic practices, such as crop diversification and stratification to address the potential challenges that we can face. We went to Malawi after this consultative workshop in a mission on 13-16 May this year, where we have conducted on-farm screening, on-station screening, and it's ongoing, this activity. Then we have identified trial stations for the pilot phase, considering a feasible number of stations and assess their germplasm capacities, and this has been done. We have defined a tentative list of crops, and these are pear millets, mucuna, and sweet potatoes. Then after, we have decided on future collaboration with South Sudan, and I'll tell you more later on while we discuss this country. We had a mission just 1.5 months ago. You can see the picture in Cabo Verde, in Praia. There was also the Secretary of State attending, the President of INIDA, and Jean will deliver later on her speech. And we discussed the suggested crops, and there were vigna, sweet potatoes, and peanuts. We have agreed on the coordination of the project that will be carried out by INIDA Research Institute, and the experimental phase that will be defined and the sites will be identified. For Morocco, the third country here, after the consultation meeting in February, we are planning to convene a meeting with stakeholders, FAO, ICARDA, and CIRAD. Develop a work plan for the upcoming year, identifying the resources needed, including budget, human resources, trial station location, taking into consideration, of course, water availability, and the list of crops online with the compendium that we have developed. Conduct also a mapping exercise in collaboration with the organization, meet with key players, such as the Ministry of Agriculture. We have already had the first meeting, preparatory meeting with them, and to hold a global meeting with the 4 countries all together as a kickoff to approve and share discussion and reach an agreement all together. Then last but not least, of course, is South Sudan, where we had an initial consultation with the government. We had a meeting online to discuss the next steps, and we are planning an exchange visit in Malawi. So we will have this consultative meeting together with South Sudan and Malawi. So looking to the achievements and the next steps, our objectives are to present promising drought-resilient and nutrition crops with the potential for improved biodiversity, and discuss with all the participants their opportunity. And this has been already achieved, as I more or less explained you today. To discuss a first pilot phase with identified crops in the proposed 4 pilot countries, Cabo Verde, Malawi, Morocco, and South Sudan, done already. Third point is to agree on crops and countries across all FAO regions, because you might know that FAO is divided by region. They are listed here. And everything will be included in a global project. And in the end, to engage with all participants to receive inputs on the way forward in order to ensure and maximize the ownership by all for a greater impact, of course. So in conclusion, we all know that water scarcity is very complex and an urgent challenge, but we can address it all together. Alone, we cannot really deal with such a big issue. And the AWSAME initiative is more than just a project. It's really, the scope is to bring together expertise from different partners, and all together, starting with these 4 countries, try to achieve water scarcity in agriculture using this drought, nutrition, salt-tolerant, and forgotten crops. So together, I think we can really create a resilient agricultural sector. So I invite you all to, during the discussion that we will have, to really share your experience and find a place for you to play a key role in this initiative. Thank you. Thank you, Jean. Over to you.
Thank you, Rosaida. I can maybe spice what Rosaida said a bit. So when we did our desktop study and identified all these kind of crops, I think 7 varieties. There are tubers, there are fruits, there are legumes, there are cereals, and so forth. We felt that the most likely groups were the vigna, that's leguminous, and the cereals, mostly millets. So then we went to these countries. We brought them together in Morocco, and already they started, we only brought 2 people per country. And it's ambitious to think that 2 persons can represent the opinion of a whole country. But at least we had the first iteration. Then the second iteration, we went to countries. So the visit to Malawi was very enlightening. I think if there is a country where indigenous or traditional crops are valued, Malawi is one of them. So they have a gene bank, which is really an unassuming building, but they have teams that go out there in the country to collect some of those forgotten crops, and then they analyze them, they confirm they have, I don't have the exact terminology, but they really analyze them until they confirm their characteristics. And once they are satisfied that they have these specific properties, for us it's a drought resilience, it's a nutritional value, it's also potential for biodiversity, then they release them to the general public. So, and then they start disseminating them all over the country. And so when we got in Malawi, so the participants beyond the two who were there in Morocco then took over the process. And they said they needed mukuna and sweet potatoes, and of course, millets. So when we went to Cabo Verde, the Cabo Verdean rejected millet altogether. They said they've tried to adopt it in the past, it was never accepted. So they settled for cowpeas, which is a vigna. Then they proposed peanuts and sweet potatoes. South Sudan is a specific case because first climatically they are not so dry, but they have areas where they have droughts. And the engagement that we had with one representative, there was only one from South Sudan, then he introduced us to government and we had a Zoom meeting. We felt it was more appropriate for South Sudan to interact with Malawi. So as we start implementing the project in Malawi, we'll make provision for a delegation from South Sudan to go there and learn from what is going on in Malawi so that they can take it back home and adopt it. In Morocco, we found that there was plenty of capacity that we did not expect. First, and I would like Mr. Vinay Nanga to prepare himself because I would like him to be the next speaker. He works for Ricarda and he's based in Morocco. And so after the workshop that took place in Ben Guerir, so we went down to Rabat and we met with several officials. And it emerged, first, ICARDA themselves, they are there, and in engaging with government, they mentioned ICARDA's capacity, but also they've got an Institute of Agronomy and Veterinarian Sciences, EIV, and they also have the capacity. So in our next steps with Morocco, as you see, there was a long list of activities. Those activities are meant to support all other countries. And one of the expectations that we have is that if we can reach a mechanism of north-south cooperation, Morocco is in a good position where they can play the role of a hub to facilitate exchange of experiences and learning, because we already have two strong institutes there who can facilitate this task. So I'll stop here for now, and I would like to invite Vinay to speak. And Vinay, take your time. What is good with you, Vinay, is that you know WASAG that we mentioned at the beginning, but you are also, and you are on the steering committee meeting of WASAG, or not steering committee of WASAG, but you also an expert in indigenous forgotten crops. And what we were told by one of the partners that we met is that having brought ICARDA to Rabat, you actually brought a lot of expertise. And you created expectations that you were the right people to help countries to proceed rightly with this initiative and make sure that these forgotten or opportunity crops were actually valorized. So over to you to share what you think about it. Thank you, Vinay. We can't hear you, Vinay. I think your mic is off. Still not. Just a second. Still. No.
Give us 1 second, we are figuring it out.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Try speaking again, please.
Try again. No.
Not on the stage, I'm the technician, I'm figuring it out.
Maybe while you are figuring it out, I can share with you the experience from Cabo Verde. Cabo Verde was also supposed to intervene online. And so Nora, from the Director General of INIDA, sent her speech and allow me to read it to you. So on this workshop on building resilience through indigenous crops for food security and nutrition, Nora sends the following message. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organization of this workshop for inviting me and to say a few words, and it's a pleasure to attend. Oh, good, let's stop here. Okay, over to you, Vinay.
Okay. Thank you. Happy to be addressing you, joining you virtually from Cairo. I was unable to come because we have a meeting with ICRIS taking this year. It's starting to, so it was something to participate in. So as many of you may know, CGIR has two sister centers, ICARDA and ICRIS, which are responsible for pilot agriculture research. And the crops that these two centers are responsible for are neglected and the underutilized crop species that we are talking about. Pigeon pea, chickpea, lentils, all kinds of sorghum, millets, etc. So the two centers combined are trying to serve the whole of the dry areas and trying to work on some of the neglected crop species. If you were to look at these species, like there are about 50,000 edible plant species in total, of which just 15 provide 90% of the calories. And just 3 of those, rice, maize, and wheat, provide about 60% of the calories. That's how skewed the balance is. There are so many crops which people have been eating historically, have been part of their diets historically, and lately we have replaced them with just a few. And we see that here in the Middle East and North Africa region as well, that ICARDA is trying to serve here. It's mostly wheat-based diets, wheat after wheat after wheat, monocropping system with very little opportunity and very little support for some of these neglected crops, which have been historically part of their diets, like faba bean and chickpeas and hummus that they eat and falafel that they eat and stuff. Yet the predominant support has been for wheat. And when you talk about food security, it's the wheat that the country produces. It's not the rest of commodities that the country produces. So it's quite sad in that sense that so many crops that can grow, that have grown, that have been widely been cultivated have the origin in this part of the world, have been neglected and forgotten. Some of the high-profile people like Kari Fowler have called these crops as opportunity crops. Anthony Blinken in the World Economic Forum recently in Davos called these as genuinely revolutionary crops and ideas that can help the African continent especially, but also Asia, to be food secure, to be climate resilient. Because these crops that we are talking about require very little water, can withstand harsh conditions such as salinity, drought, heat, such a short growing season of 60, 70, 75 days that it takes very little residual soil moisture to grow these crops. And we have been trying to grow these in the MENA countries for a very long time. Our gene banks are respected and known for the collection that we have of all these crops and their wild relatives. So it's expected that we have all the genetic variation that is needed for breeding for these kind of crops going forward and making them even more climate smart. What we have done recently in February of this year was that we held MENA regional first ever conference on neglected and underutilized crops. We had close to 1,200 participants joining us, some in person, some virtually, over a course of one full week, where 28 countries represented 48 neglected and underutilized crop species. This conference was held in collaboration with the AGMIP program, if you're aware of, the crop modeling group, out of Columbia University. So we teamed up with AGMIP to have the AGMIP MENA regional platform. And together we held this conference in which we had so many very high profile keynote speakers like Michelin star chef, like World Food Program winners like Cynthia and Ratan Lal, and also the UN ambassador for food legumes, Professor Siddiqui, joining us from Australia. So it's a rich gathering where we came up with so many publications, so much of work that is happening in this part of the world that has not been captured yet. So if you look at the universities, if you look at the national partners, there is so much happening and the awareness is building and people are demanding these crops. It's increasingly being seen that as part of healthy diets, whether it's part of school meals, there is increasingly demand for altering the diets and bringing back some of the neglected and underutilized crop species. What we are primarily trying to see and the challenges we are trying to face and trying to tackle is firstly, the limited awareness. Secondly, the market access for these crops, the seed availability and multiplication, and insufficient research and extension services for these. So they don't make it very profitable proposition. There is no crop insurance available. There's not enough extension material available, which are some of the bottlenecks that are yet to be addressed. We at ICARDA are looking at, even in a wheat-based system, how you can bring in some of these crops. So we have tried to see, when you're growing wheat after wheat after wheat, can you have sesame growing in between? Can you have beans growing in between? White beans, kidney beans? Can you have chickpea growing? And we have seen that if a farmer grows only wheat, he earns about $800 to $900 a hectare. If he grows only lentil, he earns about $600 to $700 a hectare. But if he introduces quinoa, sesame, onions, or beans, his profitability goes up to as much as $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 a hectare. And it just takes the residual soil moisture. It's not extra land, not extra water. And these are doing biological nitrogen fixation in many cases. So it's good for the environment, good for the farmer, and it comes at no cost in terms of land and water. So it's the best you can do in terms of profitable diversification of your diets and your cropping systems. And you can make healthy soils. You can have additional source of income for the farmer, as well as a nutritious diet that the farming family consume and the whole country consumes. It's good. It has good export potential as well. So that's the other angle that we are looking at. If these countries can use their limited marginal lands for growing these crops, which can be having export potential, added value potential, and can be additional source of revenue for these farmers. So we're very fortunate to be teaming up with John and the FAO team, especially the WASAG team, and when we gathered together at the UM6P campus, had very good conversation. And we hope to continue this collaboration and this dialogue that we started there and bring some of the action to Morocco and build upon the efforts that we have been already making as CGIAR, and then join forces with FAO and EAWE and the other partners such as the Ministry of Agriculture to tap into the potential of these neglected and underutilized crops. With that, I'll stop talking and back to you, John. Thanks for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Vinay. And I hope you'll stay online so that you can answer some questions later on or intervene. Now you can allow me to read the message from Cabo Verde. So I say she was saying that's Nora Silva. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organization of this workshop for inviting me and to say that it's a pleasure to attend. Cabo Verde is made of 10 islands on the west coast of Africa in the Sahel region with a dry tropical climate. The average rainfall is 250 millimeters per annum. As a small island developing state, it faces unique climate change vulnerability and development challenges, and it has been marked by a difficult situation over the past 7 years due to extreme droughts. Despite this, the country has experienced an upward trajectory in the recent decades in terms of food and nutrition security, thanks to sectoral policies aimed at reducing all forms of malnutrition. However, the country needs to increase its resilience and adapt to climate change. So Cabo Verde is part of a group of 4 countries selected by FAO, that's Cabo Verde, Morocco, Malawi, and South Sudan, which agreed at a workshop held in February this year in Ben Guerir, Morocco, to cooperate in a pilot phase to build resilience to water scarcity in promoting indigenous crops combined in the context of Cabo Verde with saline-resistant crops and resilient agronomic practices and efficient water management with a focus on sustainable agriculture intensification. The main objective of the workshop was to establish synergies and reach an agreement on indigenous crops identified as most suitable for inclusion in the respective countries for pilot project proposals with a view of their wider adoption. Following the Ben Guerir workshop, a workshop took place in Cabo Verde from 1st to 4th of July 2024. Participants hailed the initiative as an excellent opportunity to promote undervalued, forgotten crops and assess their potential. The workshop was preceded by a field visit which enabled the AWSAME team to get to know the reality and understand the specificities of Cabo Verde as a small island developing state. During the workshop, the pilot phase of AWSAME in Cabo Verde was discussed in a participatory manner. First, the proposed crops, millet, and the availability and potential implementation side were discussed. It should be noted, as I said earlier, that millet is not grown in Cabo Verde, so it was kicked out of the list. Field experiments are to be carried out with identified crops combined with agronomic practices, growing season, and trial sites. So with regard to the crops identified for the pilot project, it has been suggested that to use Vigna unguiculata, may the experts forgive me if I don't spell it properly, I think it's cowpeas, and 2 other alternative crops, that is sweet potatoes and groundnuts, which are of interest to the country, and in combination with the following agronomic practices: organic fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, and supplementary drip irrigation. This is in order to guarantee the crop water supply during periods of rainfall shortage. It is also planned to carry out tests with specific types of local varieties of the Vigna unguiculata at INIDA experimental station located at the different agroclimatic zones. These are the arid zone, the semi-arid zone, and subhumid zone on the island in order to select the most drought-resilient ecotypes and the best agronomic practices. The workshop provided an opportunity to create synergies and share experiences and knowledge with other initiatives and technical collaboration, particularly in the field of the technical guidelines for the design and management of pressurized irrigation distribution systems in water-scarce areas. I'd like to thank the AWSAME organization once again for this invitation and express Cabo Verde's commitment to making this project a reality. So that's the speech from Nora Silva, and I'd like us to give her a hand. So Cabo Verde, when you go there, you have a contrast. If you look at the environment, it's so dry that you'll be depressed. But when you speak to the people, you get a different figure, a different picture. They are very resilient, they are very positive. And I like to refer to the example of Cabo Verde when I speak to the people in my village. Where I come from, we have on average 1,500 millimeters of rain per year. So the dry season is ending now, so it starts in June and ends in August. And there people complain. The yields are very low. In Cabo Verde, like when we were there in July, you'll stop. When the first stop we did with a colleague from INIDA, it was like bare land with some dead leaves, and there was nothing to see. Then we got on site, and we saw that they were growing some specific leguminous. And he was showing them to us, and you could see that, yeah, these people are very, very resilient. And so this is to express their commitment and their expectations mostly. So I'll stop here for Cabo Verde. We have two speakers in the room. Claudia Rengler, I'm very happy that you are here. Yes, please. Like Vinay, who is on the steering committee of WASAG, Claudia, together with Jenny, who just stood up, they are involved in the WASAG working group on water and nutrition. And you have heard throughout the different interventions that, and as in Rosaida's presentation, for us the entry point through this initiative on drought-resilient crops, indigenous crops, one of them is water scarcity, of course, but the other one is nutrition. And really, I think, Claudia, please feel free to educate us and to challenge us. The floor is yours.
Okay, yeah. Thanks first for inviting me to this very important event. So similar to Vinay, I'm part of CGIR, which is the largest agriculture research and innovation network responsible or with a mandate to support improved food security in low and middle income countries. So indigenous crops is obviously a very important topic. And it's also good that Sean suggested I focus on the nutrition aspect of those crops. I think that's a very important aspect. But again, we need a systems approach, nutrition, water, climate resilience, and obviously livelihoods. We have to consider all of those have to work out together because otherwise we shouldn't focus on indigenous crops. And so maybe I'm taking a step back. Globally, there have been calculations since around 2019, 2020. Globally, currently about 40% of the population cannot afford what we call a healthy diet. I think no one could afford a sustainable healthy diet, even so that's the official moniker that's out there. But in terms of a healthy diet, so 40% of the global population cannot afford that. It's being calculated as household income in excess of 52% that would have to be spent on a diet. So if a household would have to spend more than 52% of their money just to purchase food that meets dietary guidelines using the most low-cost food options available in each of the countries, then you simply, you can't afford it. Currently, right now in Europe, people spend around 14 to 15% of their income on food, not necessarily healthy diet, but they have a lot of room to afford a healthy diet. In North America, people spend a bit less. generally considered to eat even less healthily as well. So again, they only spend around 10 to 12%. They could also, have a lot of room if they would spend up to 52%. Surely, most of them, many of them, could afford a healthy diet. But in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, 75% or more of the population, it depends on the country, cannot currently afford a healthy diet because they would have to spend more than 52% of their income to purchase foods. And so in comes this, proposal. And I think, right now with undernutrition globally increasing since 2017, because of conflict, climate change, lack of investment in agriculture research, people, governments' budgets are getting diverted into wars, fighting migration or supporting migration, and into many other topics. Plus, the past investment in ag research is not enough given climate change impacts. So because of that, undernutrition is increasing, and we need all hands on deck. And any effort on improving indigenous crops, the awareness, the use, given their often better adaptability in terms of climate resilience and water use, I think we certainly have to support that. It's not enough, in my opinion, but it's a very important step. It's very strongly promoted by various governments, including the United States government, with the vision for adapted crops and soils. And so the US government has put some serious money into this. This year's World Food Prize winners, so the World Food Prize is in October, will be issued, goes to people who have spent their life, dedicated their life on increasing dietary diversity and biodiversity in agriculture systems. So all of that points to the importance that is now being accorded to these indigenous crops. So in terms of what does it mean? Especially the focus here is on Sub-Saharan Africa, but also North Africa. I think Jean has already said, so one part is nutrition, and one part is water, and one part is climate resilience. So in terms of nutrition, the key foods that people cannot afford in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are animal-sourced foods and fruits and vegetables. So this is just too expensive. They can't afford eggs or meats or fruits, etc. So the crops suggested here, they're both leguminous crops and also cereal crops. But that doesn't mean that this initiative is not improving the path towards more healthy diets, because as you might all be aware, with the war in Ukraine, we have seen serious increases, also unfortunately, in prices for cereals, wheat, for example, prices went up. So it's good to know, Vinay, that Moroccans can still afford wheat, even so prices have also shot up dramatically. Prices for oils have gone up also in response, because a lot of sunflower oil, etc., was also produced in countries that are now at war. And so these crops are important to replace some of those crops who are now also too expensive in a healthy diet. And replacing these traditional crops can open space, obviously also for more protein-rich foods, which some of those leguminous crops are. So they can, to some extent, also support or replace the animal source foods that people can't afford. And they can help simply. This diversification is essential given global crisis. The COVID-19 crisis was a similar phenomenon where food trade had dropped. And so again, if we find crops that countries can grow with less water, existing systems, and better climate resilience, that's certainly something to support. Of course, there are challenges, and I think Vinay has listed a bunch of them. Lack of awareness by farmers and lack of awareness by consumers. So, he mentioned, I think, even quinoa, which is one of those niche foods that was rediscovered And farmers have been able, those farmers who were early entrants into the quinoa market, made a lot of money. After that, there's various other things. You know, it's not all a success story alone, but exactly, we have to get into those crops. If they get the right support, they can both find support with consumers and support with farmers. But we do need the seed systems in place. We do need the market system in place. We do need the awareness of the consumers. And maybe two things to add. So in sub-Saharan Africa, there is still a lot of potential to increase irrigation sustainably, unlike in much of the rest of the world. This being said, currently irrigation increases is still largely has been confined to Asia, where most of the increase has been using water that's already not really available, so-called unsustainable increase in irrigation. Despite that, there is potential in Africa, but right now, most of this irrigation development increase, especially the ones supported by national governments, goes into rice production. And, and rice production is not, okay, we have a sister center that focuses on rice. I'm not saying too much about rice, but it shouldn't all be in rice. Let's put it like that. We really need to diversify. And I think, again, this indigenous crop initiative is a very important initiative in this area. And I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Last but not least, before you take the floor and interact, Nakita. Nakita is going to speak in a dual capacity. She's free to add other capacities. First, she's very young. May I disclose your age? She's not 25. And she's very soon going to get her PhD in agriculture economics, below 25. She's a citizen from Cameroon, but she's doing her PhD in Rome. So I have two questions, or one question for you. As I said, you are young, and you're you're on the higher end of the youth, because you're going to get your PhD, specifically in economics with an interest in agriculture. When you hear about these indigenous crops, and you heard all the presentations and the different speakers, what is your take as a youth and as an economist, seeing yourself as a future Minister of Economy or Agriculture in Cameroon? What are you going to do to promote or kill these indigenous crops and their potential? You have 5 to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Bohoto, for the very...
Speak into the mic. Huh?
Okay. Thank you. Okay, this is better. Thank you, Bohoto, for the very ambitious introduction. Yes, and thank you all for being here and supporting this presentation. And thank you, FAO, for this initiative. So for your question, I definitely think that indigenous crops represent a big opportunity worldwide, in general, and in Africa in particular. For many reasons that you mentioned, that CGIAR mentioned, and AWSAME is also here. But I will mention 3 reasons to kind of summarize what has been said here. So firstly, indigenous crops represent a very great opportunity for the nutrition sector that was said before, precisely because it has a lot of nutrients, vitamins. If we take the example of fonio in West Africa, that is rich in iron, zinc, and we can also have sorghum, millet, that is rich in proteins and antioxidants. And therefore, they can help address malnutrition and food security and help align with the SDG 2 of zero hunger. The second point can be agriculture. As you said, I'm completing my PhD in economics with a focus on agricultural economics. And it can help. Indigenous crops are very important because they are more resilient to drought than some other commonly used crops, and rice has been very much mentioned. Rice is now a big star in the crop world, and so for the agriculture sector, they are very resilient to drought, and this can help addressing the climate resilience, especially in the climate change perspective. And we are all acknowledging and living the consequences of climate change. So by adopting indigenous crops, we can tackle the challenges of climate resilience, and the vulnerability of agri-food system, knowing that vulnerability is an ex-ante concept, while resilience is an ex-post concept. And thirdly, it can be very important in the employment sector, as you asked to talk about both as an economics and as a young person. In the employment sector, indigenous crop can be very important because it can create employment along the whole line of the value chain, from farming, processing, marketing, distributing, especially for women and young people who are often not very well represented in that sector. I am from the Generation Z, and the Generation Z is very famous for many things far from agriculture, but it's actually very critical in the employment opportunities. And for example, in Cameroon, I am from Cameroon, and I worked for the Ministry of Economics before, and there are big efforts that the government took to attract young people in the agriculture sector. For example, the program PEA, that aims since 2015 to give a lot of incentive to young people to join agriculture, because sometimes this is not seen as a fancy job, but actually it is. And so for these three reasons, that among many others, indigenous crops are very essential. Their adoption is very essential. And so what can young people do to go toward that direction? Many things. For example, the problem of awareness has been mentioned by CGAR. So a possible action can be to raise awareness through our social media. Not everyone is aware of these indigenous crops. Also, I was not aware of that when I was born, is by knowing about it, talking about it. So we can definitely use our voice, our social media to talk more about indigenous crop. We can also support research. For example, in my PhD studies, I am writing a paper about the impact of climate change on agricultural production, and there I study different types of crop. We can support research in that sense. We can also influence decisions, like participating in the policymaking process at different levels, either with the United Nations or with our environments, with our governments, or with the NGOs, or by volunteering. There is a lot we can do as young people to address these issues and to help to help indigenous crops to have their place in the crop world, if I can call it like this. I hope I answer your question.
Well, I think if you didn't, they were not going to applaud. Specifically that you spoke without any support. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord, and thank you.
Yeah, the floor is ours. We have exactly 32 minutes. So I suggest that if there are questions, we take 15 minutes of comments, questions, and then the following 10 minutes, the panelists can reply, including you, Nakita. But I'll see mostly Claudia and Vinay online, and Rosaida or myself. So anyone who wants to raise their hand, please, the mic is coming to you. If you can introduce yourself, the institution you come from, and then try to be concise.
Hi, Marianne Paulin from Danone. A very interesting topic that you are investigating here. I was wondering if you have conducted already any downstream studies or market studies to potentially envision how those resilient and forgotten crops can be included in the new consuming patterns.
Thank you. Vinay, I ask you to take note of that question because it's part of your expertise. Yes, there is one there and another one up there. Yes, and here. Yeah, you can start here. You can start here, and then we go over there. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Gerard Steehouwer. I work for AWSAME. We have a program called Sowing Diversity is Harvesting Security, working on NUS for 10 years. And in our experience, it's very vital. I think what you're doing is this bridging the gap between the research system and the farmers' organizations. So my question is, who sets the priorities for which NUS are being researched? And how can local women play a vital role in that choice? Then the other elements from our experience is what is vital is indeed the marketing of those, but also the registration of farmers' varieties. It's so complicated in countries that for local groups to register their own varieties is almost impossible. And they want to register because then they can make profit out of it. So that's more like how can FAO and the others play a role in that governments also facilitate farmers' rights and the making it easy to register your local varieties. And last but not least is land rights. I mean, farmers only invest in crops they know from the past probably, if they have secured land titles. So I would recommend, to include a vision on land rights, especially for women, in the program. And happy to collaborate in Malawi, where we also work with CIRAD, by the way, as Oxfam on NUS. So, yeah.
Thank you. Then, we'll take all the questions. I think it's better, and then we ask the different panelists to reply.
Okay. My question also relates to the selection of crops to include. One of the indicators of nutritional security is dietary diversity. And I noticed that there's no leafy greens included in the program. We do know that there are some countries in sub-Saharan Africa where there's an increase of demand for indigenous leafy greens. So I just was wondering about the crop selection and if you're looking at dietary diversity and the access to vegetables as well.
Thank you. Up there. There are three, I think 2 hands. Are there any more hands? I see 2 there. 3? Yeah. Then we take those 3 and then we... Yes.
Thanks to all the panelists for their informative presentations. I'm Renee Robbins from the Jamil Water and Food Systems Lab at MIT, and I'd like the panelists to address the question of economics and cost, both from the consumer side and the farmer side. So I know in the U.S. at least to buy some of these newer, to us at least, grains like quinoa is a lot pricier than corn or wheat. So I'm curious from the consumer side in some of countries in Africa, what do the economics look like? And then also for the farmers to purchase seeds, can they get them from the same sources where they're buying seeds currently, and what are the economics of that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you again to all the speakers. I'm Eliza Swedenborg at the World Resources Institute. I very much appreciate the sort of systemic approach that this initiative has taken. My question is about the relationship between indigenous crops and the land restoration opportunities? Are there relationships for land restoration that are perhaps uniquely connected to unique indigenous crop production? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Anton Urfels from the IRI, the International Rice Research Institute. So we also work on other crops sometimes. We see the same issue though with the going to other cereals rather than leafy greens. It's an interesting point. But I wanted to ask another question. I was wondering whether there's any examples of any larger scale change to these NUS crops from any of the countries or regions that you've worked in, because I think the water saving is always touted as one of the key benefits, but we know that often with water savings, something else happens that then kind of counteracts the intended savings that we wanted to try to achieve. So I'm really curious if there's any examples and if there was any unintended consequences that perhaps increased water use, for example, by land area expansion to make up for the production increase that's wanted. Thank you.
Thank you. Very final question, and then we will start wrapping up. I'll give my layman perspective.
I think there's one more question.
Yes,
that's fine.
Yes, that will be the last one. Yes, yeah.
Sorry.
That's good, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Timo Gaasbeek from the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have CJR in my portfolio, and I'm the focal point in the Netherlands for VACS, so very interested to hear all the stories here today. I have a few comments and questions. One, the urgency for looking at other crops, I think, is really high. We know that the big cereals, the yields are not keeping up with climate change. Wheat due to multiple breadbasket failure droughts, maize due to heat tolerance, and rice due to, among others, sea level change. If we don't do anything, the world food production, the cereal production is going to destabilize within decades, and we have a massive problem. However, when I was talking to someone recently about what we called then forgotten crops, that person's response was, but those crops were forgotten for a reason. Are we sure that we have got the reasons why they were forgotten properly on the radar? Maybe they're difficult to grow, maybe the yields don't get high enough. So that's a possible concern, while not taking away from the importance of the work that's being done here. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you. So I'll just speak for a few minutes, then I'll give the floor to, first to the panelists, and then a second round. So Vinay, you will be the next one to speak after me. On the leafy greens, for example, amaranth. Amaranth is both a cereal, but also a leafy green. I eat a lot of amaranth. It's called lenga-lenga in Swahili, and yes, it's definitely. So we have 6 groups, including the fruits, the tubers, but what we felt like were low-hanging fruits that we could focus on were those 2 varieties. And as countries then started taking ownership, they've been proposing others, but definitely they are on the list. One of the benefits on the land restoration opportunities, for example, these leafy greens, mostly, for example, mucuna, it's a leguminous that has the property of fixating nitrogen, but also including improving soil moisture conservation. So when you grow, for example, maize and mucuna in intercropping, you use a control and a target. You'll see that with the control, with the target, long after the rains have stopped, the maize continue to grow, and the next season the soil is richer. You don't need to use a lot of fertilizers. Plus, also they eliminate crops and pests and so forth. So this is a dimension. Carbon sequestration and so forth. So those benefits are definitely considered. I think I'll give the floor to Vinay, and then to Claudia, and then Nakita and Rosaida if you want to add something. You don't have to. Vinay, over to you.
Thanks. I was taking notes and trying to jot down some ideas on stuff that we are trying to do here. First thing that we are trying to do is it's very difficult to change the people's behavior, the diet. So one of the things that we are trying to really work on is gradual transition so that people don't even feel the difference. So one of the things we are trying to do, for instance, here in Egypt, is trying to replace the wheat-based bread with a little bit of blending of nus crops, so 5%, 10%, 15, 20, until they can feel a distinction. And we are partnering with the Nutrition Institute to see how long is the shelf life, how nutritive it is, can it be part of the school meals. So gradually trying to influence the dietary habits of people without making a significant change that their palates are not comfortable with. Second thing we are working on are the bottlenecks, such as these crops are not machine harvestable. These crops require long cooking time. So how can we do plant breeding such that these stay long, erect, and then you can have machine harvesting possible? How you can reduce the cooking time. So instead of cooking for 30, 40, 60 minutes, if a lady in Bangladesh or in Nepal can cook her lentils in less than 20 minutes. So trying to look at the women aspect, what would they want, what traits would they want in these nus crops to be wanting to cook them, and also looking at the aspect of greenhouse gas emission abatement. So if you're cooking for lesser time, if you are using less fertilizers, you're having biological nitrogen fixation, if you can have some residue retention, how all these things, agronomic practices and the additional add-on benefits of these crops, which probably were not taken into account. One of the colleagues touched upon, if they were forgotten, they may be forgotten for a reason. Probably these co-benefits of these crops were not taken into account, and all people were looking for was to put the food on the people's plates. When the Green Revolution happened, it was all about intensification of wheat-based diet, rice-based diets, lots of fertilizer application, whereas these biological nitrogen fixation, the nutritive value of these crops, the greenhouse gas emission abatements probably were not taken into consideration. And when you look at holistically, probably now it's making sense. The other thing we're trying to do is do intercropping of these crops. Some of the conventional which are part of the food security. So I can't expect a farmer to overnight stop growing wheat and start cultivating something I'm promoting. So how you can intercrop these crops so that it can be a win-win. Farmer would want to grow as top line or bottom line increases, either production increases or productivity increases, and net profit increases. So how can you make a value proposition for a farmer to adopt these, not just because it's good for the his pocket. And in the MENA region, we are looking at the MENA diets, like lots of olives they eat, dates they eat, wheat they eat, so many other things that they're consuming, and lots of meat-based diet. What is the virtual water footprint of the MENA diets? And if we were to introduce these neglected crops, how could it bring down this virtual water footprint of these diets? Is another thing we are trying to make the region future ready, trying to inform the decision makers that you are having some of these really water thirsty crops, and probably you may want to move away from them gradually and support some of the necessary enabling environment needed for promoting these kind of nus crops going forward. With that, I'll stop talking, John. I think I've taken too long, but thank you so much for opportunity to come back.
Thank you. Yeah, Claudia, yeah. You are too shy to come in front. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Really, Vinay has already, I think, said most points, but I'm an economist, and so yes, the question is they probably didn't make economic sense for in part, they didn't make economic sense because diversification wasn't considered as important as it is being considered now. And again, the climate resilience aspect is quite important. But not only that, I mean, we were living in this world where, trade, where we thought trade was going to take care of the diversification issue. So, countries should produce those few crops that they can produce most cost effectively, most adjusted to their soil and water conditions and other conditions. And so everything else gets traded. And of course, we now know this is unfortunately not where the world has been moving in the last several years. And we do not see a change coming up. There's a lot of trade protection happening. And countries, don't allow export of their crops, which obviously affects the poorest countries and the poorest people all the time. So we have to try to, increase diversity in production systems to the extent possible, without, rapidly worsening national environmental conditions, including water. I think diversification just has to be more part of the story than it has been, also with CGIAR. Where we focused, almost solely on productivity growth, and as we've heard, severe long-term underinvestment in agricultural research. We are total factor productivity growth has been declining, input use has been declining, and high-income countries will continue to decline because of Green Deal and other policies. So we are seeing increased food prices, unsurprisingly, and increased food inflation. It's kind of difficult to see how we can change this in the short term because trends are not changing. But to say, before I digress more, so we do need rigorous evidence. So we currently don't have sufficient rigorous evidence on which of these neglected, underutilized crops, work, where are good entry points, and so that's one thing. And that includes considering the environmental externalities. We've heard, for example, we've had 3 energy price crises that have increased fertilizer and pesticide prices over the last 15 years. And of course, food prices have gone up as a result as well. So again, the IPM question, so integrated pest management question of some of these underutilized crops, the lower fertilizer use if you intercrop with beans. So there are some additional environmental benefits that might make some of these crops more profitable. And what did I want to say in addition? Oh, in terms of then how do you increase? How do you actually implement this then? If you find some crops with potential, what India has been doing is really school procurement. So school meals have to use a certain share of indigenous crops. Neglected crops. I don't know the specific policies, but they've been doing a very good job. So they're usually being highlighted as a country that has decided those are our indigenous crops, and we will put them. Our children will eat them, and when children will eat them, they will continue to eat them as adults. That's kind of the thinking. And don't run to McDonald's and get a chicken burger. So those are actually policies that can make a difference. And there's other government procurement that can happen, right? In canteens, and there's various government policies, food-based dietary guidelines. They can also recommend crops going forward. In terms of the selection, my understanding was it was done at the national level because there was a question. I agree that that's a first step, and I think that's the idea. You do a pilot, and then you go further and go to the district level and other subnational areas, and develop those networks. These are the crops we're interested in here. Those are the crops we're interested there. Those are the trials. Those are the marketing mechanisms. So I think quite a bit can be done. Now given that we do have this global push is maybe too much, but increased interest in these neglected crops. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Rosaida and Nikita.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you for your very good questions. So about the question why forgotten crops, so very good, thank you. I think some of them have been, there are various reasons why different crops in different countries has been forgotten, and maybe some of them has a good reason, some others no. So that's why we are really investigating in deep different varieties, and if you can look at the compendium that is also available on our website, I think you can really see it's a long list of crops that has been identified, that has been analyzed, and we came out with some suggestions, various suggestions. Then During the consultation workshop in Morocco, we had the opportunity to have all the countries together to discuss and agree on these two crops that they want to focus on, and it was vigna and millet. But as also Claudia said, then we go down to the ground and we move to countries. So each countries identify a different crops. So the idea is really to reflect the needs of each country. And regarding the question about markets and also the economic aspect, I think this comes exactly in the next phase that we are facing now. So of course we rely a lot on the countries. The situation is different for each countries, but they can also learn each other. And in the next phase, what we are doing is consult. When we do this workshop in the countries, we invite ministries, we invite members from the governments, we invite research institutes, we invite farmers association. So these partners from different backgrounds, they provide different insights, and this helps us to produce the project based on the country needs. And of course we take care of the market. That's also what I mentioned, because it's really important, and the economic aspect of course from consumer but also farmer level. So thank you very much for all your insights, because we took note of everything and we will follow up. Thanks.
Nikita?
Thank you very much. I think all the questions have been replied by my colleagues before. So if I can just add a little bit on what Hosaida said before about this variety, and it can also be a very important point for diversification, both at the nutrition level and also at the income level, because we know that for the resilience of a household, there are many important pillars: the access to basic service, the adaptive capacities, and under the adaptive capacities, income diversification. Income diversification is very critical. So this indigenous crop can also broaden the scope, and we also, with the 2008 food crisis, how the vulnerability to related to the fact of depending on few stable crops. So it can be very important to also diversify those crops which have a lot of interesting properties. For the sake of time, I would not expand more, but also on the health sector. And we had a world debate with Boroto before on how, especially in our countries, in Cameroon, for example, when I will be sick, when I will have a flu, as I have now, my mother will not give me paracetamol or ibuprofen. She will use a crop that is called mesep, and then boil it with ginger, and then with this water that I will inhale, I will be healed. And same when COVID happened, of course, vaccine, I'm sure it worked, but also in our cases, in our countries, we were using also some methods, for example, still with those crops that are not internationally known, but it worked. So those crops have many properties that are still to be discovered or to be made visible, and that can help the global production in general. Thank you.
Any burning comment, question before we wrap up? Jenny, I thought you were going to say something. Sorry to tease you, maybe take the mic.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I think there's been a lot of good things. My name is Jenny Barron. I'm a professor in agriculture water management at the Swedish University, and I also work with the WASAG working group on water and nutrition together with some of the people here. And I think that it's really interesting, as you brought up this story about how you use certain crops that maybe are not so well known and scientifically evaluated. And I think that this is maybe my challenge as a professor working with crop systems, that these crops still need to be looked after and managed in an agronomic sense. And we have so little evidence on how to actually maximize the production per labor input, per area input. And this is a big piece of work of evidence that needs to also come along with all the other factors on profitability, for example, or nutritional outcomes. So I'm really happy that FAO with partners are taking the first steps to evaluate some of this work together with the partners in the country. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So I will wrap up. I think one question that was not addressed was the issue of upscaling. If these crops are adopted at a large scale. I think this is an opportunity to monitor. If they ever reach a large scale, then we need to monitor and take in the lessons from the Asian Green Revolution and see if also the yields can be improved, if water can be used efficiently. You heard from Cabo Verde that they promote these crops, but at the same time they have to promote them while ensuring that they use water efficiently. One last story to close. So mucuna has been mentioned. And so when I was working in Ghana, in the north of Ghana, they have, unlike in my village, where we have 9 months of rainfall and 3 months of dry season. In their case, it's 3 months of rainfall and 9 months of dry season. During those 3 months, they have to produce food to feed their families. And so when it has been a good rainy season, they can produce enough food for the rest of the year. But when the season has not been good, really, then they start rationing food. You start with 3 meals after the harvest, down to 1 meal only for kids, and then the mothers or fathers will go in town to look for opportunities to produce more food. Livestock also comes in as a saving because you can sell your goats or sheep. But what we did, what we realized, so we introduced mucuna, as I explained on, to increase yields, and mostly to make sure that once it stops raining, then the mucuna can kick in and allow the maize to continue to grow. We did that 1 year. The second year, farmers transformed themselves into seed growers for mucuna because they saw the opportunity, and it took off. Of course, I've left Ghana since then, but I know that for this specific clear benefit, you didn't need to do anything. It was advertising for itself. So with that, I'd like to close this session. Thank everyone for your participation. The conversation continues. If you can show, please, the last slide. I think our email address is there. It's our last slide. Yeah, it will come, hopefully. And we still have 3 minutes. Yeah, it's not coming. But it's water/scarcity at FAO.org. So the last, if you can scroll to the last one. Yes, there. So water scarcity at FAO.org. Please take note of that email address and write to us. If you have a business card, you can also leave it to Rosaida as you leave this room, and we can continue the conversation. On Thursday at 2 p.m., if you look on the program, there is a program, the title is Partners Stepping Up Collaboration to Address Water Scarcity in Agriculture. WASAG that you have not heard about, you have heard about so much. It is about WASAG, so we invite you to come and be updated on the interesting developments that are happening on WASAG. Thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts. We were very anxious when we started this session. You're the first to walk in, and you saw how anxious you were. So thank you very much. And thank you to our technicians. And thank you to Vinay, who was there online. And if there was any online participants, you can send your questions through the same email address. Thank you very much. The session is closed.